in another part of the country. According to Nechama Leibovich, she found out from, and she quotes Rashi and Barbanel and a lot of people, that Pharaoh put them there because they worship a different god. And he didn't want, when they buried their sheep, that they should be in his land, because the sheep and the cows was considered to be sacred. And that's why they built the calf in the desert, because as a idol. So he gave them, he wanted all those gods the Jews, the God that the Hebrews believed in, shouldn't be a part when they buried their sheep. It shouldn't be a part of his land. And then also she says that the Pharaoh took the land from all the people that were in his land, because they were from different kind of cultures. He was involved in many wars. Right. And there was a lot, and he took over a lot of slaves and people that weren't just Hebrews. Right. And the reason that he took the land from them again is because they didn't want any part of their gods associated with him, because he himself was considered to be God. And when he was buried, he shouldn't be buried with any other gods.
That's very interesting. That's very, yeah, it's very interesting. And thank you. Also, and in addition, the idea of Shaddai, El Shaddai, a god of the chest or the breast, some of our commentaries say when with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, God was like a nurturer, like a parent. He was bringing them along, teaching them how to be, followers of Judaism. We wouldn't call it that.
And the word Adonai, just one more minute. Adonai means my master, but the Yud Hey Vav Hey, it's I am. Like I am what I am. I am.
That's right. It means
I'm a eternal being. I am there.
It means eternal. I was, I will, I am, and I will be. But also, according to like the commentaries, there's two main names that we know for God, Adonai and Elohim, or Adonai Eloheinu. That's the one that we usually say. Baruch atah
Elohim
Adonai
is plural.
Okay, yeah. Okay, but I want to talk now, Penina. But okay. Elohim or Eloheinu, or the plural, that was associated with justice. And the Adonai, the Yud Hey Vav Hey word, was associated with mercy and compassion. Wow. And so the commentary says that when God revealed his intimate, compassionate name to Moses, it's like, I'm not a parent to you. I'm talking to you face to face. We're not equal, but we're like, more close than I've been with anyone else. And so I'm going to reveal, and I'm going to treat you with mercy and compassion, because that's how you treat the Israelites, even though they're very difficult. So God is revealing another aspect of God's self to Moses that he hasn't, we have to say it because like Maimonides says, we have to use these words because we don't have anything else, that he hadn't revealed to anyone else. So that's just the very beginning when he says, who am I? Hold on. Okay, so now I would like someone else to read. And wait, I just need this to go down. Okay, who would like to read? Okay, Merle. So start with 3. I did 3.
I appeared 4. And also I established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land of their sojournings in which they sojourned. And also I heard the moans of children of Israel, whom the Egyptians are holding in bondage, and I remembered my covenant. Therefore say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will take
and this place is I am Adonai, the merciful one in Hebrew. Go ahead.
Okay. And I will take you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will save you from their labor, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments.
Okay.
And
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, and I will take you to me as a people, and I will be a God to you, and you will know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians.
So I think this really refers back to what Penina said, that in case the commentaries, who always like to put the Jews in a, in a good position, say, oh, the reason they were saved is because they never gave up their Hebrew names, and they did keep their Hebrew names, and they didn't forget. But here God's saying, I am that God. I am not one of the Egyptian gods. I am not one of the Canaanite gods. I am your God, and you're going to be my people. So there's this chosenness between the two. You chose me, I'll choose you right here in this thing, and I'm going to redeem you. And he goes further how God's going to redeem them, but it is like, go down and remind them who their God is. We can't imagine 400 years with no religious leaders. The traditions were probably very corrupted or very lost, and there was very little that they retained, except maybe a memory and their names. So this is what he's saying, go down and tell them who I am and what's going to happen. Okay, so, but Moses is a very reluctant prophet, as we know. Hold on, let me just move. Okay, let's just this thing. Okay, so here is very interesting. Oh yes, Lorraine. Sorry.
Rabbi Nanus, this morning when I was reading the Parsha, I had precisely some questions on that particular area. I was wondering if maybe you could expand on that phrase that says, my translation says, I have now heard the moaning of the Israelites because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage. And I have remembered my covenant, which is number 3, I believe, of what you have on your text.
Yeah.
So my question is.
No, it's number
4. Well,
it's
okay,
5.
number 5.
It's 5. It's
Yeah.
5. Okay.
So the question is either over there it omits the term now, but I felt like, why is it now that God is remembering the covenant? Is it because of the bondage, but shouldn't have been a remembrance of that all along? Are we waiting until we are having a tough time to remember the covenant? Or I don't know if there's any type of expansion on that piece, because I feel like, wow, things shouldn't get so bad for the covenant to be present all along, right? So I was wondering if there's anything that you have to say about that.
So I'm looking, because I have this really good commentary about it, to see what they say. And it does say, I have now, in this translation, I have heard also, or I have now heard them. And why now? So, okay, does anybody have any ideas before I talk about it? Does anybody have any suggestions or thoughts about why now? Why now? Penina.
The covenant was in the beginning that God is going to give them the land as a price for their believing in them and him. That was the covenant with Abraham. And that was you cannot separate, according to Albright, which wasn't even Jewish. He said that you couldn't separate the religion from the land, from being in that land, the Hebrews.
Yes, but the question not is why.
So let me finish.
400 years.
Because now they are not there. They're not in Israel
anymore. But they haven't been there for 400 years.
It's okay. But so their concept of what it is to have a God like him, the one that you cannot see, got distorted in the meantime, because they were not living among other people that believe just like them. So there was always assimilation, whether there is never 100% in any nation of anything. So now they are in trouble, but they're not there. They're not independent. So it's supposed to be Remember my strength. Remember what I can do for you. Remember that I am the upper God. So now that you need me, here I am.
Okay, so here's the question, Lorraine. I mean, thank you, Penina, because I think you're right. Perhaps they did not cry out to God until now. Perhaps they were not,
there was no slavery for them.
It wasn't, they were there for a long time, but it was only the most recent Pharaoh that enslaved them, killed their firstborn, made things really hard for them, and became crueler and crueler. And, if we think about contemporary life, like there are no atheists in foxholes. You know that expression? Do you know what that means, Lorraine? It means when you're in a foxhole is where in World War I, people were fighting soldiers and they're stuck in the foxhole. And that's when your life is on the line. Suddenly it's like, oh God, if you let me live, please let me live. Suddenly you're bargaining, you're calling out. Suddenly everybody believes in God when, things are really bad, as Penina said. So perhaps God was, this is all kind of a beautiful
story. He gave
story.
people free choices.
Yes.
And they abused it.
Well, I mean, it's human nature but now things are really bad. Also, I think it's interesting that sometimes the right leader has to appear. And let's speculate for a moment about Moses, because he has some deficits that we're going to read about in like 2 seconds. But what are the pluses of somebody like Moses being the leader? Can you imagine? I'll give you a hint. He's a Hebrew slave who grew up in the palace.
Yes.
Yeah. So Susan.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. He was a leader of stature and had known the good life. He wasn't, and they say that a number of leaders in our history have been from a privileged life, and he earned some respect too. So.
Okay, but not only that, he straddled both worlds.
Yes,
he knew the Hebrew. He was a Hebrew. He had his mother, his brother, his sister. He had the Hebrews, and he lived among the Egyptians. So he's bicultural, so to speak. You know what I mean? Multicultural, bicultural. And we can't imagine that Egyptians were very familiar with Israelite life or ways, or Israelites knew much about Egyptians except as servants, but Moses straddled both worlds. Ironically, that's also one of the reasons the Israelites didn't trust him and didn't like him sometimes, because he hadn't suffered like them. What do you know? You didn't go through this. So there's it's both. I mean, he understood both sides, but he wasn't immersed in both. So who knows what kind of psychological crisis he had to deal with, always living kind of on the edge of both worlds. And as we know, he left for 40 years, he ran away and lived in a whole other culture. So to avoid it, and last time we looked at it, he almost forgot, it says, about what was going on in Egypt until he had that experience with the bush, because that's another thing. It's very easy for us to live here and we know about what's going on in the Ukraine, but we're not in Ukraine and we go on with our lives. Then suddenly, somebody says, you need to go to Ukraine, and you go there and you go, oh my God, it's really terrible. Even Ukrainians, I'm sure, who go back. So I think, Lorraine, what I'm saying is, it seems like God was waiting for them to reach out, to connect again. And does that work for you?
For now, it does. Thank you so much.
Okay, I want to move on a little bit.
May I say something in there too?
Yeah.
First of all, you just mentioned now he actually has another culture, which is the Midianites.
That's right.
So but wasn't there a Hyksos invasion or something between the two? There was another administration that came. They're thinking of that archaeologically, between Joseph's Pharaoh and the new Pharaoh. So there might have been a new Pharaoh. And answering Lorraine's again, there may have been another administration that was favorable to them as well.
Beforehand.
So, yeah, beforehand.
Yes.
So
there's also the theory that there was this Hemnatop, I think his name was, or who was a monotheist who believed in one God, but it was the sun god. But he had this idea of just one God, and he ruled for a while, but then he was overthrown because people missed their gods. No way, I'm giving up my fertility goddess and Ishtar and Isis and all those. And he was overthrown. But, you know, if you ever read Moses and Monotheism by Freud, Freud's idea is that Moses was actually an Egyptian who was a monotheist who made a deal with the Hebrews. If you will follow this monotheistic belief system, I will get you out of here, or I'll help you leave or something. So that's Freud's idea, but it's very interesting also about Moses. Well, but I want to, yes.
No, but just, I mean, he grew up raised by a pharaoh's daughter speaking Egyptian. So it's the Hebrew credentials are sort of weird, you know, picking up in a reed boat.
Yes, but we know that he intervened when a slave was being murdered, yes, because he had sympathy. And there's no, I mean, it seems like first of all, he would have been circumcised. Yes. So he would have known he was a Hebrew, even if he was, you know, an alienated Hebrew, but it was part of his identity. And everybody else had to know he was an adopted Hebrew slave because of that, because, you know, I'm sure they knew. So he was a stranger and familiar in both
bicultural.
Exactly. So I want to get to this, Rabbi, his voice, his speech impediment. Yeah.
Joy had her hand up.
Oh, Joy, sorry. Thank you. Joy?
Hi, thank you, Lorraine. I just had a question. Earlier, when God is making a covenant with Abraham, doesn't he specify the amount of time?
Yes, he says you'll be slaves. There is that thing. Now, if you're a purist and you're Orthodox, you would say, yes, God predicted that you would be slaves for 400 years or so many years and come back. Biblical scholars would tell you that was added later.
Okay.
Because the Torah was, so it depends how you want to think about it. The Torah was written, you know, and then refined and edited and redacted, and that once the whole story happened, you know, the whole slave thing, the scholars went back and said, you know, let's put it in here. You know, they added it. They did that in about a few things. But yes, it is predicted in the text. Absolutely, okay. It is predicted. But even when you hear that, you know, we're hearing about global warming. Most people just live their life. You know,
right.
What I mean?
I was thinking in terms of Lorraine's question of God hearing now. It sort of seemed like he maybe just waited for, or God just waited for the time to lapse that had been said before then the now was my.
That is another way to read it. Absolutely. That's a very valid way to read it. Thank you. Okay, I want to go on to, because I really want to get to this because it's so interesting about Moses. Hold on, where he says, okay, and then number 9, verse 9. So there's this, first of all. Lorraine, why don't you read number 9?
Moses spoke thus to the children of Israel, but they did not hearken to Moses because of their shortness of breath and because of their hard labor.
So, okay, I'm gonna just go a little more and then we'll come back. Here it is. Okay.
You want me to continue?
Yeah.
Okay. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Come, speak to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and he will let the children of Israel out of his land." But Moses spoke before the Lord, saying, "Behold, the children of Israel did not hearken to me. how then will Pharaoh hearken to me, seeing that I'm of closed lips?
Okay, so that word, first of all, the closed lips is one translation. Another, literally, it's uncircumcised lips. But then another translation is impeded of speech. Impeded of speech. Moses had some kind of impediment, and God, when at the burning bush, an incident when God said, "Go down to Pharaoh," he said, "I am slow of speech and heavy of tongue. I am not the right person." And God said, "Not here," and he said back then, Aaron is going to speak for you. Aaron, your brother, will speak for you. So first of all, so there's two questions. Here comes this Redeemer, God character, who says, "I'm going to help free you," and they don't even want to listen to him because they're exhausted and they're working too hard and they don't believe him. And then he says, "I can't speak because I have slow speech." What do you think that means? I found a big article about all the possibilities of what that could mean. So there is a midrash. I don't know if some of you know the midrash that when Moses was a baby, Pharaoh's magician said, "This child is a threat to your kingdom and he should be put to death." And of course, Pharaoh's daughter argued, "This is an innocent child, you can't do that." And so they said, "We'll give him a test." This is a midrash. "We'll put a bowl of burning coals in front of him and a bowl of gleaming jewels, like Pharaoh's jewels and crowns and everything. And if the child reaches for the jewels, he's a threat. If he reaches for the coals, he can live." So in the midrash, the baby, of course, reaches for the jewels, and an angel comes down and pushes his hand over to the coals. He touches the coals, burns his fingers, puts the fingers in his mouth, and burns his tongue. So the rabbis say that's why he had a strange speech. However, what else could it? I actually found this interesting article because I thought, could it be a cleft palate? It says uncircumcised lips. You know how a cleft palate is cut in half and you can't speak, and slow of speech, you don't pronounce things and whatever. So that was Eric, did you want to say something? But you're muted.
Yeah. The other thing is that he would have grown up speaking Egyptian, so he'd be translated. Hebrew would be a different language for him, and he would be slow. You know, if you're speaking another language, a second language, that can be a problem in formulating what you say and how you say it.
Absolutely, and that was another suggestion, that he wasn't adept in Hebrew or Egyptian anymore, because he'd been living in Midian for 40 years, and he said, I don't have the words anymore to be so articulate and to say it. He had, he wasn't good in either language anymore. So that's one of the possibilities. And others say he had a stutter, he had a lisp. Merle, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I read somewhere that he stuttered, and because he stuttered, he chose not to speak if he didn't have to.
Right, like King.
Which is very common with stutterers that, can't overcome it.
Exactly. So he could have had a stutter, he could have had but he had some, or was it he just didn't have the words? So that was another thought. He just didn't have the right words in Egyptian or Hebrew or Midian. I don't have the words, but so what does that tell you, that God didn't even pay attention to that? Okay, just a second, Panina, because I love to hear from you, but I love to hear, what do you think it means that God didn't take that as a reason? Or what does that say to us today about impediments?
God understood what he was saying. God could read his mind.
God understood him, but he was saying, I can't speak to Pharaoh because I don't have the words, or I don't sound right when I speak. Yes, Benjamin?
Well, something about the message, and that the message was beyond just words, that the importance of the message, that would come across no matter what words were used. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Some kind of charisma, some kind of stature, some kind of presence. And Penina, head. Penina, you're muted.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I think he actually grew up in both worlds, like a world.
Yeah.
And I think his own belief of what is really the God that he's supposed to follow in his own mind was already becoming a question, because he lived, like you said, with the Midianites, who were idol worshippers for 40 years, and they were good to him. And he married into them. So that's a big thing, because the wives, they had to literally...
they run the house. Yeah.
Exactly. And they were, remember that she circumcised their son or whatever later. So, well, anyhow, but I think the identity of who is really God, and the fact that people were given choices, that was a part of the whole thing. It's not that he didn't believe in God, he believed what kind of God. And that's why the 10 Commandments came later.
Okay, I have a question though.
He needed himself proof to see that God is going to work.
Well, yes, but his argument is something much more personal about insecurity.
Yeah, I know. The speech, I think, is just not being sure himself mentally of where he's standing.
That's interesting.
To give somebody a message, but he himself didn't get yet any proofs that thing is really going to work.
You don't think the burning bush was as some proof?
I think the 10 plagues were really a bigger message.
Okay, well, yeah.
A better,
that was a message
message
to everyone.
Yep.
Okay. Any other thoughts about Moses's reluctance to be a leader? Yes, Joy. And Susan, after you. Yeah.
There's the quote that says to speak little but do much.
Right.
And so in terms of that and what Penina had said about the plagues, I think maybe God did not consider Moses's supposed impediment because the actions would have spoken louder than the words anyway.
I like that. Thank you. I think that makes perfect sense. Yes. Susan.
Yes. I think it's been emphasized too that God looked into Moses's character when you're saying, why did he choose? What difference did it make? That he didn't have, and he compensated for that by saying that Aaron will be your spokesperson. But there were these 3 trials that Moses had of showing his character with the saving of the Hebrew slave, the interrupting the 2 Hebrew slaves who were fighting, and then also Zipporah at the well when he shooed away the shepherds who were trying to take over from the women. So there were 3 acts of character and of action and empathy with other people.
I love that. And I'm just going to repeat what Susan said if you're not aware of what she's referring to. The first thing, when Moses saw an Egyptian taskmaster beating a slave to death, cruelly, he intervened and ended up killing the Egyptian and then hid him. And then the next day or so, he saw 2. So he couldn't bear that kind of suffering. Then he saw 2 Hebrew slaves. This is all in the Torah. Hebrew slaves fighting. And he said, don't fight, don't fight. And they said, well, what are you going to do to us? Kill us like you did the taskmaster? But he tried to intervene, and he was a peacemaker and he was a defender. And then he said, oh my God, they know, everybody knows. And he left. And then when he got to Midian, where he met his wife, well, there were 7 sisters actually. And as I always say, the J-date of the ancient world was the well. And there were these 7 sisters who were shepherdesses, and the shepherds were giving them a hard time. They were trying to water their flocks, and Moses, basically defended them against these shepherds and helped them water their flocks. And then I love saying this. So then they went home, and their father, who was a priest, said, you're home sooner than usual. And they said, well, this young Egyptian man helped us. And the father says, go back. And I thought, oh my God, I have 7 daughters, a possible husband. Go back and invite him to our house. Let's thank him. And And he ended up marrying, his oldest daughter, Zipporah. But I always think of, Yitro going, an eligible husband, and I have 7, like Tevya. I have all these daughters to marry off. But anyway, and then also when he was approaching the burning bush, he was going after a lost lamb, which is the idea of the image of the shepherd. Jesus was a shepherd also, the person who takes care of the most vulnerable, who can tend the flock of people or animals or whatever. So I agree with Susan that there was this compassion and kindness in Moses until the Israelites drove him crazy, because then he just couldn't take it. But for a long time, he had a lot of compassion. Before I call on Penina, does anybody else want to say anything? Okay, Penina, and then we're going to move on. Go ahead. You're muted. You're still muted.
How about now?
Yeah.
Okay. There is one sentence that really, really made me think. When he said to the Hebrew slaves when they were fighting, he asked the one that was like beating the other, he said, why are you doing it? He says, Madua taker re'echa? Why are you hitting your fellow man? I think this idea of social justices shows that was really strong in his mind.
Yeah.
That the fact that he asked about somebody else's feelings, why are you doing it? This is something that gives me the direction of his thinking, that the idea was that the whole thing is to change human behavior, the way they treat each other. And all the laws that came later in the 10 Commandments are actually results of what he watched people do that was acceptable or not acceptable, and what worked. So that's a very important sentence that I never even paid attention to it till lately. That when he asked him, why are you hitting him? That's important.
I agree with you. And also the sign, it seems to be, if you look at the book of prophets, the sign of all the great prophets is that they're very reluctant. It's only, and I have a whole theory about Jonah. Well, Jonah's the most reluctant. He just runs away. But they all feel like, I'm not worthy to do this. And, it's the egomaniacs and the people with the personality disorders and the megalomaniacs that we need to, that's almost the test. The humility is kind of a test of someone who's worthy to be a leader, in my opinion. Okay, so let's continue. I had this whole thing about, did Moses have a cleft palate or whatever? It was really interesting. Okay, so then we go to, so the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, and he commanded them concerning the children of Israel and concerning Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, to let the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. Now, Aaron starts to step up and have a lot more important role. And we didn't even know about Aaron. During Moses's birth, we never heard about Aaron. We heard about Miriam, but not about Aaron. Now we hear about Aaron. Now, there's suddenly this like pause while they mention all of the houses of Israel. And I thought it was interesting in terms of genealogy, just to take a look at a few of them that I thought were really interesting. They go a lot into Levi, the Levites, because Moses and Aaron are Levites, and then Aaron becomes the Kohanim, the priests, and they even give Levi's life, 137 years. So, and not only that, here are Levi's sons, Gershon, Kehat, and Merari, and then they go into Levi's grandchildren, the sons of Gershon, and then they mention his grandchildren. And the sons of Kehat were Amram. Amram is important because that's Moses' father. We're going to find out. And we even learned about Kehat, and he lived for 133 years. So we're really following more than any other tribe, the genealogy of the Levites.
Till today.
Till today.
My husband is a Levite, was a Levite.
Okay, yes. Now, Avram is Moses' father, took Yocheved, his aunt, as his wife, which is very interesting. And apparently, I looked at a commentary, that's now forbidden, but this was, a really long time ago before these laws. and she bore him Aaron and Moses. And the years of Amram's life were 137 years. So people lived a long time, according to this. But he took Yocheved, and that is the name of the woman who put Moses in the basket and put him down the Nile. They don't mention Miriam on it, interestingly, here, but we do hear about her later. Okay, and then it talks about Aaron took himself a wife. So we learn about Aaron, but they don't mention Moses here, which I find interesting. Elisheva, the daughter of Aminadav, the sister of Nachshon. Now, we all know the amazing Midrash. I didn't realize that Nachshon was Aaron's brother-in-law. And I'll just stop for a minute. Does anybody know the Midrash about Nachshon, a son of Aminadav? He's a really famous Midrash about him. Susan, yeah.
The Jews were reluctant in the Dead Sea, in the Red Sea or Sea of Reeds. The Jews were reluctant to go into the waters, and Nachshon was the first one to go in. And
that's
when the waters parted.
Yeah, no one would go in because they didn't really part. This is the Midrash, but they single him out as a prince and a noble man and a wise man and a leader, a chieftain, that he walked into the water up to his ankles, his knees, his waist, all the way up to his chin. The water still didn't part, and suddenly it parted. So I was reading this and I thought, oh, I mean, because I just thought Nachshon was someone we heard of, but he's actually in the text, which is so, oh, wait, no, that's the wrong way to do it. I need to do it like this. I need to share it. So I wanted to just look at that, see some of the genealogy because, and I find this interesting. And then Eliezer, the son of Aaron, we hear about Eliezer, who becomes one of the priests later on when Aaron becomes the first high priest. His son Eleazar is also like second in command, and they had some children, but whose children are missing? Whose children are not mentioned? Moses' children. We don't hear a thing about Moses' children. And their names were Gershon and what was the other name? I can't remember the name right now because it was a few chapters ago, but his son and...
Wasn't it Menashe?
No, it wasn't Menashe.
Oh.
That was one of Joseph.
Yeah.
But he had two sons, and so there's this theory that he sent them back to Egypt. Back to Midian, that he sent them home, that they weren't even there because later, right before the 10 Commandments, his father-in-law shows up with his wife and sons. So they had been sent back. But I find it interesting that Aaron's sons are very significant, but there's no descendants of Moses that we ever follow. Why do you think? Do you have any idea why that might be? Why is there no descendant of Moses that we know of that are mentioned ever again, or we never hear anything about? Sometimes, yes, Lorraine.
I'm going to take a stab at this one. I think that when Moses died, there was a keen interest in not having him like a deity, right? Like he died in a place that was anonymous so that there wouldn't be any type of, they wouldn't revere him like God. So I think that in the same vein, perhaps obscuring his lineage follows that line of thought so that they wouldn't revere his line, his genealogy, because he was Moses.
I think that's a really good answer. You know, what was the name of that movie with Tom Hanks based on the book, you know, about, oh my God, it was all about, you know, the church and everything. And that they said, oh, Jesus has a genealogy in the end. They said that Jesus had a child and they were looking for this child or whatever. But I think you're right. The idea of deifying him or his bloodline might have been part of it. And that is one of the reasons that in the real Haggadah, because we have many Haggadot that have been rewritten, Moses is not even mentioned in the Haggadah. because of that very reason that we're very conscious of how easy it is to deify pharaohs, Caesars, saints or whatever. And so I think that's a pretty good idea, pretty good reason. Okay, let's continue. All right, so that I thought was pretty interesting about who's not missing. And then Aaron and Moses, to whom the Lord said, take the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt with their legions, with all their people. And they're the ones who spoke to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and to let the children of Israel out of Egypt. They are Moses and Aaron. So now I'm saying Aaron is really stepping up to be a partner. And this is like, I didn't really notice this until I looked at the text this time, how significant Aaron is. And there's something about Aaron's character. Well, let's talk about Aaron for a minute. When he died, the Israelites grieved for 30 days. He is the one that made the golden calf for them. They went to him and he did it. So, and he's a better speaker than Moses. And also, I don't know if you remember this, after Moses came down from Sinai, he had this like radiance, this aura around him that was so blinding that he literally wore a veil for most of the rest of his life. He had to cover his face or whatever because there was too much light coming out of it. So so how would people perceive Aaron, and how do you think they related to Aaron compared to Moses? What would you think? Judy.
Am I unmuted?
No, you're unmuted, yes.
Okay. Well, Aaron was approachable.
Yes.
And Moses was not. Aaron was the kind of prophet you could have a beer with,
You'd be somebody you could have a beer with. You could, yes.
And Moses was, just too above them. And obviously, if there's somebody, you're going to resent somebody who is above you, whereas you're going to relate much more to somebody who is, more approachable, who's going to build a golden calf for you.
Well, yeah, which wasn't a good choice,
yeah,
but
no,
knew
but
they
in
could
terms
get
of, you were talking about how the Israelites were rather unruly and hard for Moses to corral. Whereas Aaron had much more success.
I agree with you. And it's interesting that this was another question. Why weren't Moses' sons or descendants made high priest? Why was Moses made high priest? And one thing is that he couldn't speak well, so he couldn't be a leader. But maybe he was somebody that the people, as you said, could approach more. And if they had to confess things or had problems or they wanted to do these sacrifices or whatever, they felt like Aaron could relate to them, whereas Moses would hold them to an impossible standard, perhaps, in terms of what he would expect for them. But he becomes very beloved more and more, and they're very close. I mean, Aaron and Moses are very close, but it seems like, one is he's more beloved and Moses is more revered or respected. Susan, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I mean, that's what I was going to say, but also I'm wondering too, there are two sides to Adonai too, the lawgiver and whom you respect, the Elohim, and the Adonai
right.
Closer to you. So maybe these are two facets of that dichotomy.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, and you need both sides. You need both in a leader, and every leader, very few leaders can have everything. So you had one for this and one for that. I mean, okay, so let's continue. All right, so even though, we know the story, sometimes you look at it and you see it so differently. Okay. Again. All right, who wants to just read this? Judy, why don't you read?
Starting where? 28?
28, yeah.
Okay. Now it came to pass on the day that the Lord spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, that the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I am the Lord, speak to Pharaoh and everything that I speak to you. But Moses said before the Lord, behold, I am of closed lips, so how will Pharaoh hearken to me?
Okay, just go on to one more.
The Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you a lord over Pharaoh, and Aaron, your brother, will be your speaker.
Keep going.
You shall speak all that I command you, and Aaron, your brother, shall speak to Pharaoh, that he let the children of Israel out of his land. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and I will increase my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. But Pharaoh will not hearken to you, and I will lay my hand upon the Egyptians, and I will take my legions, my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt with great judgments.
Okay, so there's two big things. First of all, this is he's saying Aaron's your spokesman, but I'll speak to you. He doesn't speak to Aaron. God does not speak to Aaron. He speaks to Moses, and Moses speaks to Aaron. And again, Moses is going, I really don't want to do this. I'm not good at this. Why do I have to talk? No one's going to listen to me. Don't worry, don't worry. But now here's a big ethical dilemma. And I wish everybody had the Eitz Chaim Chumash. You have it, Susan, because it has such great commentary. Now, here's this question. If God hardens Pharaoh's heart, is Pharaoh responsible? Oh, you got it too, Ben. Okay, it's fantastic. I mean, I'll even tell you the page. You can look at it. Where is it? It is page 356. Okay, so I looked it up in the internet, and then I'm going to let Susan and Ben read what they have. It's an amazing book because it has so many great commentaries. Like the top is the text and the bottom are all these different discussions and commentaries. I looked up I looked it up on the internet, and it's mainly the Christian interpretation. And they all say that God hardened Pharaoh's heart so that God's glory in the world would be recognized, that people would see how great God was when he redeemed the children of Israel. And it's all about God's glory and making God, the world see how great God is. And in Judaism, we're not so keen on this idea of God's glory or as a reason for doing things to make God's great name great. Yes, I know there are other gods, and we're recognizing this God. I know what you're going to say. And so it was a way for this God, Adonai, to be recognized and to be respected and accepted in a world, in a pantheon of all the other gods, to show this God is higher than all your other gods. On the other hand, isn't it kind of a ruse if the way God does that is he has to make the Pharaoh's heart hard so that he can then show his greatness? I'm going to call on you, Penina, but first I would like Susan, why don't you start reading this? I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and then Ben, you'll continue it, because this is fascinating, and it's the Jewish way is like, well, then is Pharaoh responsible? And then there's an answer. So go ahead, Susan.
You said page 356.
Yeah, on the bottom, chapter 7, I will harden Pharaoh's heart.
Chapter 6. Well, I don't see it here, but I see I see the explanation.
That's what I want, the explanation. Okay. I will harden Pharaoh's heart.
Says the verse raises major moral and theological problems.
Okay, a little bit slower because people need to hear you.
Okay. The verse raises major moral and theological problems. If Pharaoh is foreordained to reject Moses' plea, if God will arrange for the confrontation to continue, how can Pharaoh be held responsible for his actions? And how can we justify his being punished for what God causes him to do?
So, in other words, if God's making this happen, how is Pharaoh responsible? Okay.
I love these various explanations. Although hardening of the heart seems deterministic, events flow naturally from the ambitions and conflicts of a human being. Pharaoh, who is seized with the delusion of self-sufficiency. While events unfold under the providence of God, their unfolding is always according to the motives with the human beings through which God's will is done, and without their realizing it. Pharaoh conducted himself in conformity with his own motives and his own godless view of his status. God made it so, but Pharaoh had only to be himself to do God's will. And that's
okay. So that's one of the ideas, that God just sort of emphasized Pharaoh's nature, that he didn't and also, and I'm going to call him Penina in a second, the first 5 plagues, Pharaoh hardened his own heart. And then it seems like it's like he was, according to the commentary, that was it. He had no choice anymore. He was so cruel, he didn't even know how to be any other way. Okay, Penina.
I think Moses had to be convinced. That's why he was stuttering. He himself was not sure which God is his God. And I think all this stuff is to make him believe, first of all, that there is a God that's who is going to take them out of there, and a just God. He himself, I think the stuttering is very significant. It's to show that self-doubt. He doesn't know himself. Is he a prince of Egypt? Is he a son of God? Or is he a son of God of the Jews? The father of all the people.
Okay, that's another really good idea. Another one that I have read is that the Israelites, and I've talked about this before, were so used to their degradation. They didn't even know how terrible it was. It's just like I talk about, I've mentioned this before, we walk down the street and we see homeless people and we don't even flinch. Whereas somebody who's never seen it would go, oh my God, that poor person. Oh my God, what's going on? We're just like, oh yeah, that's part of life. And there's this suggestion that the Israelites were so degraded and so debased that they didn't even know there was another way to be. And so it had to get even worse for them to leave. Because even they were saying, okay, this is the way it is. We've been this way for 100 years or 50 years. This is life, and I'm going to adjust. And that is also a problem. People adjust and adjust and adjust to things that they shouldn't. They should rebel. They should leave. They should make the change. And so this is one of the reasons that things had to get harder and harder for them to finally say, oh, I can't take it anymore. So it's 1:02, so we have to stop here.
Well, I think that it was injustice to everybody that bothered Moses. That's why the reason to start a new set of laws, because it wasn't just the Jews that were
oppressed.
Oppressed.
Well, they took
the land from everybody.
Yes,
everybody.
And also, because we have to end, many non-Hebrews went on the Exodus. Yes. According to the Midrash, anybody who wanted to join them.
Yes, 600,000. Yes,
that's right. So, Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
Remember, let's not get too complacent about what's not good in the world, and we need to try to work for change. And this time,
and appreciate what we've got. That's good.
Appreciate what we have, and not take for granted, but not stand for any kind of abuse or degradation.
Lovely thoughts.
For sure. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.